Welcome to Dialogue. This deep dive is part of our ongoing series examining documented examples of dirty politics. We're looking at those historical pressure points where political ambition or a perceived necessity just completely outmaneuvered objective truth.
In this series, we're trying to peel back the layers on moments where the machinery of power just accelerates. It blows right past the checks and balances that are supposed to contain it.
And we're not looking for cartoon villains, right? No mustache twirling bad guys.
No, not at all. We're analyzing the mechanisms. How do decisions that seem completely unthinkable in hindsight become, in the moment, politically inevitable?
Which brings us to today's topic. We are dissecting Case 3, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And this might be one of the cleanest, most chilling examples of how a government secured a blank check for war.
Based on an event that, in all likelihood, never even happened.
Our mission today is to understand how ambiguity gets transformed into absolute certainty, especially when those in power have an agenda just ready and waiting.
And the thesis here is profound. It's that dirty politics, in this case, didn't need some huge aggressive lie right from the start.
What did it need?
It just needed the political system to reward sounding supremely confident. That's it. So urgency completely outperforms verification.
And when you prioritize speed over truth.
The cost, as we saw in Vietnam, is always astronomical.
So to really understand the Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964, we have to go back a little bit. We need to establish the political climate.
The paranoia. The intense global paranoia of the early 1960s, everything, and I mean everything, was framed through the lens of the Cold War.
It was a simple binary choice, wasn't it? It was freedom versus communism.
No room for nuance. None. Washington's foreign policy didn't have a word for neutrality.
Communism was the ultimate boogeyman.
Is the global boogeyman, and the entire geopolitical strategy was containment. You've heard of the domino theory?
Of course. The idea that if one country falls, they all fall.
Precisely. If one nation in Southeast Asia fell to communist forces, its neighbors would just topple, one by one, until the whole region was lost.
Which meant that a place like Vietnam, which, let's be honest, most Americans couldn't find on a map,
Suddenly carried existential weight for Washington. It wasn't just some local civil war.
No, it was the front line against this monolithic global threat coming from Moscow and Beijing.
And that's the key. Those perceived stakes allowed for a certain level of, let's call it, preemptive action.
So even before 1964, the U.S. was already involved.
Oh, deeply involved. But, and this is critical, it was quiet.
Quiet how?
We were sending military advisors, thousands of them, technically non-combatants. We were providing massive logistical and financial support to the anti-communist regime in South Vietnam.
So it sounds like war, but without the official declaration. How did they keep a lid on it?
It was a very deliberate policy of deniability. We were running covert operations, secret raids, intelligence gathering, harassment actions against the North Vietnamese coast.
And this all fell under one umbrella operation.
It did. O-Plan 34A.
Okay, let's break down O-Plan 34A, because this feels like the context that makes the Gulf of Tonkin incident, well, not so random.
It makes it inevitable. O-Plan 34A was a highly classified program. It involved South Vietnamese commandos, but they were trained and equipped by the U.S.
And what were they doing?
Performing clandestine operations into North Vietnamese territory, psychological warfare missions, commando raids, coastal bombardment. It was fundamentally a low-intensity, undeclared war being waged from the shadows.
And the U.S. Navy was involved directly.
Directly, providing intelligence, navigation, coordination for these raids.
Which means when the USS Maddox shows up in the Gulf of Tonkin, the North Vietnamese aren't seeing some benign vessel on a cruise.
Absolutely not. They're seeing a spy ship. They're seeing an active participant in hostile actions against their sovereignty. The Maddox wasn't just there to wave a flag.
What was its mission?
It was running SIGINT, signals intelligence.
Eavesdropping.
It's exactly. Locating and mapping North Vietnamese coastal defenses to support the O-Plan 34A raids. So for Hanoi, the U.S. was already an active enemy combatant, no matter what Washington was saying publicly.
And this gets us to that critical distinction the politicians needed to overcome. The difference between advising and being officially at war.
This is the legal and political firewall. It's the line the administration was bumping up against.
Because sending advisors, running covert ops, that's one thing.
It's messy, but it doesn't require a full mobilization of public and congressional support. The second you cross into official war, The rules change completely.
You need Congress.
You need congressional authorization, you need massive funding, and most importantly, you need public buy-in to send hundreds of thousands of young men to fight overseas.
And Lyndon Johnson, in an election year no less, knew he couldn't just declare war out of the blue.
The political risk was enormous. He'd be accused of reckless aggression, he needed permission.
Or at least the appearance of permission.
He needed a legal basis to expand military action without that formal declaration of war, which is a power the Constitution reserves for Congress.
So the table was set.
Perfectly. The U.S. was already provoking the North with Plan 34A, the public was primed for anti-communist action, and the administration was actively looking for a legal bypass. They needed a crisis to materialize.
And so we arrive in August 1964. The stage is set with this incredibly complicated backdrop of covert war. And on August 2nd, the inevitable happens.
The USS Maddox, a destroyer just bristling with intelligence-gathering equipment, is in the Gulf of Tonkin.
Officially on a routine patrol.
Officially. But it was sailing very close to North Vietnamese claimed waters, and it was actively collecting that electronic intelligence right after a period of intense Plan 34A raids.
So the North Vietnamese were not going to just let that slide.
No. They saw an opportunity, or maybe a necessity, to challenge what they saw as a blatant provocation.
And they did.
They absolutely did. On August 2nd, 3 North Vietnamese torpedo patrol boats, PT boats, engaged the Maddox. And this was a genuine military confrontation.
Real shots fired.
Oh, yes. The PT boats fired torpedoes, which missed, and machine guns. The Maddox fired back with its 5-inch guns, and U.S. fighter jets from the nearby carrier USS Ticonderoga came in for air support.
What was the outcome of this first real skirmish?
It was decisive in the Maddox's favor. The destroyer was grazed by a single machine gun round. That's it. No U.S. casualties.
And the North Vietnamese boat?
One was likely sunk. The others were damaged and retreated. The crucial takeaway here is that the incident was limited. It was contained. It was manageable.
The U.S. successfully defended itself against an attack from an adversary it had been actively provoking.
Exactly. And if that skirmish was the end of the story, it would have been a minor incident, a footnote.
It wouldn't justify a full-scale ground war.
Not even close. Washington could have used it as a warning, maybe retaliated locally, but the incident itself didn't provide that massive, undeniable moral outrage you need to secure a blank check from Congress.
It wasn't an unprovoked Pearl Harbor moment.
Far from it. It was a skirmish that resulted from a complicated covert war that we started.
And that's the heart of the matter. Dirty politics needs momentum. It needs to escalate a complex skirmish into a simple black-and-white story of pure aggression.
To launch a decade-long war, you need more than a few dents in your ship. You need a narrative that demands immediate, overwhelming retaliation.
A narrative framed as pure self-defense against naked hostility.
And that's what leads us to what happened 2 days later, when that convenient narrative suddenly appeared out of thin air. Or, well, out of a thunderstorm.
The scene shifts. It's August 4th, 2 days after that initial real skirmish.
Right. The Maddox has now been reinforced by another destroyer, the USS Turner Joy. They're back patrolling the same area. And this night is where the story gets really interesting.
This is where certainty is forged from utter confusion.
Perfectly put. Reports start streaming back to Washington. The 2 destroyers are under attack again. Torpedoes in the water, active sonar readings, radar blips showing multiple high-speed contacts.
On paper, it sounds like a massive second assault, even bigger than the first one.
But here's the thing. Unlike the August 2nd incident, which was clear, visual, broad daylight, the August 4th event was a complete meteorological and sensory mess.
Tell us about the conditions. Why were they so important?
They were operating in pitch darkness, in the middle of a monsoon, storms were raging, visibility was practically zero.
So the worst possible conditions for trying to figure out what's going on.
Absolutely disastrous. Not just for human eyes, but for the electronic sensors. Rain, heavy chop on the water, it creates a massive amount of electronic noise.
Static, essentially.
Just static. And sonar and radar can easily misinterpret that.
So the very high-tech sensors that are supposed to give you certainty.
We're actually operating in the worst possible environment, making them highly unreliable. The radar data was intermittent, confusing. The sonar operators were hearing pings, but they couldn't distinguish between an enemy torpedo, the sound of their own ship's propellers churning in the rough sea, or just interference.
So there's a critical lack of confirmation. People are seeing and hearing things, but no one can say for sure what those things are.
And this gets to the most important detail, the internal doubt. The command chain on the ships recognized this almost immediately.
The doubt wasn't something that came later. With historical review, it was there, in the moment.
Instantaneous and profound. Captain John J. Herrick, the commander of the whole task force who was aboard the Maddox, he started expressing deep skepticism while the engagement was still happening.
What'd he do?
Well, after hours of frantic maneuvering and firing, the ships fired hundreds of shells at these supposed targets. Herrick sent a now famous series of cable messages back to his superiors.
And what did those cables say? This is the buried truth of the whole incident.
His first report was definitive. We are under attack. But then, just a little while later, as the chaos died down and he started reviewing the logs, he sent a highly cautionary follow-up. He essentially retracted his certainty. His cable said that the entire operation should be thoroughly evaluated, and he noted that freak weather effects on radar and overeager sonar operators might have caused the entire thing.
He blamed his own crew's eagerness.
He suggested it was a possibility. He even mentioned that the Turner Joy might have been engaging targets that were probably fictitious.
Probably fictitious. That's the internal assessment from the commander on the scene. They were shooting at ghosts.
And it gets even more chilling. There's another internal phrase that surfaced later. We may have been firing at our own radar ghosts.
That just says it all. A combination of technology failure and human panic.
And you have a handful of sailors who swear they saw torpedo wakes in the dark versus zero physical evidence, and commanding officers saying, hold on, something here does not add up.
So back in Washington, they're getting two completely different stories almost at the same time. Story A, we are under a massive attack.
And story B, a few hours later, from the commander on scene. Wait, scratch that. The evidence is junk? We might have just imagined the whole thing.
And this is the choice. This is the moment that seals the fate of millions.
Because that first report, the urgent, terrifying one, had already landed on the desks of the President and the Secretary of Defense. The second report, the complicated, hesitant retraction that required investigation. It required deliberation.
And a hesitant truth never stands a chance against a confident lie. Or, in this case, a confident misinterpretation.
Never. The choice of language is everything. Our ships are under attack. That travels fast. It inspires action.
Versus, we are currently investigating the possibility that our sensors were compromised by a severe thunderstorm.
One inspires retaliation. The other inspires committee hearings. And in the urgent context of the Cold War, only one of those was acceptable to an administration that was already looking for a reason to escalate.
So this pivot, this transformation of deep internal doubt into absolute public certainty, this is the masterclass in dirty politics we're here to dissect.
It happened with breathtaking speed. Despite Captain Herrick's cable, the one saying the targets were probably fictitious, the Johnson administration moved to solidify the aggressive narrative.
They just ignored the retraction.
They chose to. They chose to believe the initial dramatic report, and they chose to bury Herrick's skeptical clarification. You have to look at the political incentives. They had just been handed the perfect justification for the legal authority they wanted all along.
They didn't need certainty. They just needed the story to be useful.
And the utility of the claim that the U.S. had been attacked twice was exponentially higher than the utility of the messy truth.
So what was happening inside the Pentagon, inside the White House?
It was a blur. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, a central architect of this whole strategy, later admitted that the intelligence confirming the attack was sketchy and ambiguous. But that is not what he told the president or Congress.
He presented it as definitive.
As a fact, the ambiguity was just annihilated. There was no public statement of, we're launching retaliatory strikes, but we're still checking the sonar logs. That couldn't happen.
No room for doubt.
No doubt could be expressed publicly. President Johnson went on national television that very night, just before midnight, and his framing was simple, powerful, and absolute.
What did he say?
Hostile actions against United States ships on the high seas in the Gulf of Tonkin have today required me to order the military forces of the United States to take action in reply.
Hostile actions. Plural. That was critical, wasn't it?
A rhetorical masterstroke. It retroactively locked the questionable August 4th incident in as a solid fact, right alongside the confirmed August 2nd skirmish. It neutralized any future questions.
And this is the political genius of the move. Once that sentence, the United States has been attacked, is spoken and accepted.
The whole dynamic shifts.
The question is no longer, wait, did it actually happen?
It becomes, what are we going to do about it? The focus shifts instantly from verification to procedural action to retaliation.
And Johnson acted immediately to reinforce that.
He ordered immediate retaliatory airstrikes Operation Pierce Arrow, against North Vietnamese naval bases. By acting so fast, he showed resolve, he shut down potential critics, and he proved the attack was real enough to warrant a massive response.
This is such a crucial lesson in political communication. The speed of a definitive claim just completely neutralizes the complexity of the truth.
If you drop a high-stakes, dramatic claim into the national consciousness, the process of verification, which is slow and boring and bureaucratic, will always be miles behind the headline.
The artificial certainty hardens into political reality before doubt can even get its shoes on.
And once you've acted on it, once you've bombed another country, the political cost of admitting you acted on faulty intelligence becomes almost insurmountable. The action itself validates the lie.
So the political machinery, now fueled by this manufactured certainty and the immediate bombing, it worked perfectly to secure the one thing the administration craved.
Legal authority. They moved with chilling efficiency. August 5th, the day after the supposed attack, they presented Congress with a draft resolution.
The Gulf of Tonkin resolution.
Public Law 88408, and the outcome was overwhelming.
The Senate vote was 88-2. The House vote was unanimous, 416-0.
That unanimity is terrifying when you consider what the resolution actually was. It was the legal key that unlocked the entire Vietnam War.
What did the language actually say? What authority did it grant?
It gave the president the authority to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression.
All necessary measures. That sounds broad.
That's why it was called the blank check. It wasn't just permission to respond to this one incident. It was sweeping authority for an open-ended war. It had no defined enemy, really. It just said Southeast Asia. It had no end date.
And most importantly, it bypassed the Constitution.
It completely sidestepped the requirement for a formal declaration of war, essentially handing that power over to the executive branch indefinitely. One of the two dissenters, Senator Wayne Morse, called it a predated declaration of war.
And he was right. Johnson would use this resolution in 1965 to send in hundreds of thousands of ground troops without ever having to go back to Congress.
And this brings us to that critical lesson. Urgency kills oversight. We had to pause on just how fast this all happened. The compressed timeline is the strategy.
So how long did Congress, the body whose constitutional duty it is to declare war, actually debate this?
The entire deliberation in the Senate lasted about 9 hours. 9 hours to sign away the war-making power of Congress and authorize a conflict that would last for a decade and cost millions of lives.
And that speed meant there was no time for any real inquiry into Captain Herrick's cables, into the doubts.
It was designed to prevent it. Senator Gaylord Nelson actually proposed an amendment to limit the resolution, to say it didn't authorize a wider war. It was shot down immediately. The pressure was on to show a unified front against aggression right now.
Which creates an element of political coercion. How do you vote no?
You can't. If you vote no, you're not just voting against a bill, you're voting against American sailors who were just attacked. You're unpatriotic.
It's a political trap.
It's a perfect trap. Members later admitted they hadn't even read the full intelligence briefing. The framing had already decided the issue. The question wasn't, is this good policy? It was, do you support America? Yes or no.
And in that atmosphere, deliberation itself becomes a form of dissent.
Dangerous dissent.
And that is how the blank check gets signed before the ink is even dry on the questionable intelligence report that prompted it.
And once that resolution passed, the system was locked in. The blank check gave the Johnson administration everything it needed to go from a quiet advisory role to a massive, full-scale ground war. The escalation was immediate. It was dramatic. In early 1965, they launched Operation Rolling Thunder, a sustained bombing campaign against North Vietnam. And crucially, the number of U.S. troops on the ground just exploded.
From a few thousand advisors in 1964.
To over 180,000 ground troops by the end of 1965. And it would eventually peak at over 500,000. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution was the legal catalyst that greenlit that entire expansion.
This is the point where the decision takes on its own momentum, isn't it?
It becomes irreversible. The sheer logistics, the ships, the supplies, the troops, it creates this enormous political and economic investment. Once you have 500,000 people fighting and dying somewhere, the incentive to admit the whole thing was founded on a fiction just, it vanishes.
Which brings us to the cruel irony of the truth. As the war dragged on, the investigations started, and they slowly confirmed the doubts Captain Herrick had on that stormy night.
Years later, yes. Military reviews, and most definitively the release of the Pentagon Papers in the early 1970s, they revealed the certainty was entirely fabricated.
What did the Pentagon Papers say specifically?
The analysis explicitly stated that the evidence for that second attack on August 4th was, and I'm quoting, at best sketchy and inconclusive. And yet, it was used as the sole basis for that sweeping resolution.
And eventually, even the man who pushed the narrative admitted it.
Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. Long after he left office, in his memoirs, he just almost casually admits it, that there was essentially no confirmation the second attack ever happened. He acknowledged the evidence was deeply flawed and that they had likely jumped to the worst conclusion.
A devastating admission. But by the time he made it...
But damage was done. Vietnam had already happened.
And this is the critical lesson. Corrections fail.
They do. The correction never travels as far or as fast as the initial dramatic claim. The truth, which is complicated, takes decades to emerge through meticulous investigation. The convenient certainty achieves its irreversible policy results in a matter of hours.
The public could read the memoirs decades later, but that couldn't bring back the lives lost or undo the trauma of the war.
The political cost of admitting the original justification was a sham. It just outweighed any desire for historical accuracy once that machine was already rolling.
So if we step back from the history, the really uncomfortable question is, how do we classify this? Was it an intentional smoking gun lie? Was it just wishful interpretation?
Or bureaucratic momentum running wild? And the power of this as a case study is that you don't have to pick just one. It's more insidious than that. It's about a system that is designed to encourage the worst possible behavior under pressure.
It's not about a single villain.
No, it's about a perfect cocktail of factors. You don't need some guy in a dark room ordering people to falsify documents. You just need three critical ingredients to align perfectly.
Okay, let's break down that cocktail for everyone listening.
First, you need ambiguity. The storm, the radar noise, the conflicting reports from Captain Herrick, all of this created a gray zone.
If the reports had been crystal clear one way or the other, the maneuver wouldn't have worked.
It fails. But because it was murky, there was just enough room for the administration to interpret the uncertainty as confirmation. The monsoon provided the ambiguity they needed.
Okay, what's the second ingredient?
Incentives. The political incentive was that desperate desire for sweeping authority. Johnson was campaigning as the peace candidate against Barry Goldwater, but he needed to look tough on communism. And he needed the legal mechanism to massively expand the war after the election. The resolution was the perfect vehicle.
And the third and most dangerous ingredient?
The fear of hesitation. In a moment of perceived national attack, the system punishes the person who says, let's slow down.
No one wants to be that person.
Think of the staffer in the Pentagon who gets Herrick's retraction cable. Do they run to the president with the nuanced truth and risk looking weak like they're holding up retaliation? Or do they reinforce the initial urgent narrative that their bosses want to hear?
You choose the path of least political risk. It's confirmation bias amplified by extreme political pressure. The default setting is always speed and certainty, even when the facts are screaming for caution.
And that's the core pattern. The Gulf of Tonkin is less about Vietnam's history and more about how power operates when it senses an opportunity. You take uncertainty, you frame it as certainty, and you act before the questions can catch up. After that, reversal becomes politically impossible.
And this pattern, tragically, is still so relevant. We might not be talking about torpedoes anymore, but the language used to push for rapid action is strikingly similar.
Absolutely. You have to listen for the language cues. You hear reports about intelligence gathered with high confidence. That sounds definitive, but it's often used to mask deep uncertainty.
Or when a threat is described as imminent.
That word imminent, specifically designed to eliminate the pause, to imply that you must act right now or face disaster. It's a tool to bypass deliberation and oversight.
It's language designed to shut down critical judgment. That moment of imminent threat is the modern version of that August 4th storm.
It is. Because the ultimate question that governs this kind of dirty politics isn't the moral one. Is this claim true? That takes too long.
The real question is far more dangerous.
Is this claim useful right now? And if the answer is yes, the machine moves forward, turning ambiguity into permanent policy.
So what's the final lingering lesson from all of this?
The ultimate lesson of the Gulf of Tonkin is a truly chilling one. It's that you don't need some vast, multi-layered conspiracy to achieve a massive political goal.
You don't.
You just need three elements to combine perfectly. You need sufficient ambiguity in the field, a strong political incentive to seize power, and one dramatic claim delivered with total confidence at exactly the right moment. And you need a system that rewards speed over accuracy. That simple recipe is how a non-event can launch a devastating decades-long war.
It reminds us that our primary defense, as citizens, has to be a proactive skepticism towards speed and certainty, especially in a crisis. We have to look for the hesitation that they tried to erase.
That's right.
If the time for debate is suddenly declared over, that's probably the exact time you need to start asking the hardest questions.
That moment when they demand compliance, wearing the flag of urgency and patriotism, that is the exact moment you have to realize you might be about to sign a blank check for consequences you can't even begin to imagine.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, let us know in the comments what really stood out to you in this conversation and if there's any related topic or new topic that you would like covered in a future video.